Welcome to Local Man Does Podcast. My name is Craig Power. I'm the broker and owner of Power Realty Advisors serving Greater Boston and the South Shore. And today we must discuss the impending real estate commission changes and how they affect you, the real estate consumer. This has been big news the past week. The National Association of Realtors, their all-encompassing settlement of the commission lawsuits, much talked about. Let's talk about how the real estate process may be changing for buyers and sellers as of July, we're told. I've had an eventful couple weeks. This has merely been a part of it. I've been excited to talk about it, though. This has been one of my favorite topics the last couple years. It's daunting, but it is exciting to have these changes coming down the pipe again as of July, we're told. So, look, we're not going to do a whole history of the suits right now. The quick summary is, this has been about a variety of issues relating to the buyer side, even though it's been about, in quotes, seller damages. Really, it's about buyer side compensation. So with the National Association of Realtors, that's a national entity. Then you have all these state level associations that the National Association is overseeing. And then you also have, mixed in with that is these individual MLSs. So they're all wrapped up in this, right? So the way it tends to go is the National Association of Realtors has their rules that they mandate upon these state associations, right? And with the MLSs, they basically function like clubs, right? You get a real estate license, you become a member of this MLS. It's like a club. You buy into it, and you are able to put your listing information on there. Listing information is shared with you. These things are all intermingling, right? And the traditional commission structure has been when we don't go to sit down with the seller, right? We are negotiating a specific percentage of the sale to be real estate compensation, right? So a real estate commission. So typically around here, when we're negotiating, we land on either 4 or 5% with the seller. That is the going rate today in our market. So, we sit down with the seller, we agree that it's going to be a 5% fee, and what the National Association of Realtors mandated for a long time was that when you have that, you give part of it as cooperating compensation to the buyer's agent, so that this is in the contract, right? It's explicit in the listing agreement that the seller's agent signs with the seller. They are going to offer a specific buyer agent compensation, cooperating compensation. It's going to be listed explicitly in MLS. And the reason they're saying sellers are damaged here is because they're saying this has been an anti-competitive practice by the National Association of Realtors and really everybody participating in real estate agency for the last, these rules have been in place really since the 80s. There's also the element running parallel to this of steering, right? So steering is basically, on the buyer agency side. Steering for a long time was really the way I knew it coming up in the real estate classes was it was really more about, it was more related to like prejudices and racism and redlining. That was how I understood steering. It was sort of like a steering away from certain areas or neighborhoods. That's how I'm remembering it. But when they're talking about steering now, as this lawsuit goes on, they are talking about, one listing is offering no cooperating compensation, or maybe it's 1%, versus another listing that is offering the buyer agent 2.5%, and the buyer agent is actively, throwing out whether or not one of these other homes that is offering a lower amount is best for their client. They're steering them toward the higher one. Now, my personal experience with this, right, we sort of see everything at like 2 or 2.5% over the years. So I never weighed that into any advice. But I'm sure that when it comes to, these flat fee services, right, we suddenly have a lot of like flat fee services popping up that they offer no cooperating compensation. I am certain that what goes on is, agents, they're not we've been used to this system for a certain amount of time, and they're not dying to get into, negotiate with some for sale by owner type person that definitely is not going to want to pay their end of the fee. And they're definitely not going, they've probably pitched their buyer on, you don't pay anything for me to represent you, right? And so that's probably what's causing some steering today, and I do believe that takes place. The settlement was announced a week ago, and the settlement came out with some certain rules. Now we don't know. The Department of Justice has been intimately involved in this case. They've had their eye on it. They came out with a statement of interest in one of these antitrust or anti-competition cases here recently. And my belief is that, for NAR to go through this announcement, go through these particulars, even, establish a timeline of July, my belief is that both the plaintiffs and the defendants from this case have been at least in contact or steady communication with DOJ, right? DOJ was really pushing this along, it seems. So this was something that was coming down from on high. So with this settlement pertaining to buyer agency and the changes coming down the pipe, I would say there are four main ideas. Number one, buyer agent cooperating compensation can no longer be listed on the MLS. My read is that it can and will be a regular practice, probably negotiated at the time of the offer. Number two, fewer home buyers will be working with buyer agents. Look, I don't hate this. I'll get more into it. I think the buyer side service is going to change substantially with a wider range of offerings. Number three, third change, home buyer expenses are going to go up on average, right? For those utilizing a buyer agent. With the emphasis on minimizing seller costs, there will be more situations where buyers are paying their agent representatives out of pocket. And number four, I'd say buyer representation agreements will be mandatory. That came through. What I was going to say is that's great. The way leads are aggregated in real estate today by Zillow and other platforms, it's a pay-to-play system. I think it sucks. And I think if buyers are forced to sit down and think ahead, think harder about buyer representation, if they're going to have it, I think it'll be a positive change really for all of us. Not specific to real estate. There are actually some new FCC rules around lead aggregators that will affect the way those online buyer and seller funnels work too. That's the long and short of it. My reaction as an agent, this has been coming and talked about for a long time, really since 2019. This was coming. My general sentiment toward these real estate commission changes, I welcome it. It's really, you have to keep that pro-consumer mindset. Transparency in any industry is a good thing. If it's good for the consumer, it's good for me. It does plainly affect the bottom line of all real estate agents, not just me, right? Like I'll flat out we have 4 income streams for my business here, which is basically mostly takes place in this room, right? So this is mostly it. Last year, so we have, buyer rep, seller rep, leasing, and property management. Last year, buyer representation was the most profitable of those 4 streams, right? It wasn't by a ton, but it was number one. So, think about across the country, the total commissions earned for real estate agents in a given year. They use the term commission compression. You're taking that chunk and you're shrinking it dramatically. So now you have the same pool of independent contractors with less money to go around, less commissions available to earn. That hurts agents. That hurts the bottom line right here, no doubt. But as I said, transparency is a good thing. Got to embrace the change. It'll actually serve the reputation of real estate professionals who have been the lightning rod of everyone's problems in today's savagely unhealthy housing market. Savagely unhealthy in quotes, taking that from somewhere. As far as fewer home buyers working with buyer agents, there will absolutely be use cases for a buyer agent, a buyer representative. I can think of, we talk a lot about first-time home buyers. They really are the most in need. They have not been through, they don't know anything about this process a lot of the time. So there's definitely a role for a buyer rep there. Also, I would say luxury clientele, right? There is a certain subset of people on the higher end in the luxury market that frankly don't have the time to, they need someone to do the search for them, right? Like a lot of buyers, the problem that we have today, it's not a problem, but it is definitely a redundancy, is, search can be done by anyone. You don't need, as an agent, I talk about this all the time, it's all out there. But for luxury clientele, they're really not, in a lot of cases, they actually want help just on the search side, right? So, and there's going to be a lot of use cases for limited services, right? So I've heard it stated as a la carte services. So, not search, but negotiation, consultation, writing an offer. You think about the other parts of the more process-oriented parts of buying real estate, and I think, there's going to be a role there for sure. I think, ultimately, if commissions are coming down, and it affects people like me, our bottom line, right? It's going to do that. But it also does something for us in that it improves. It's an opportunity to improve our value proposition, right? If we're getting paid less, so that comes through pretty clear. My experience, there are savvy consumers who flat out do not need buyer agency representation, at least not full representation, right? I have some experience with that. I can go on about this. So I have some friends. This is my best example of this. I doubt they'll see this, but I'm gonna mention it anyway. So these are like two of my best friends bought and sold their house last year, right? These are very savvy consumers. They had purchased their first home in the last 5 years. They weren't completely unfamiliar with the process. They're just like, they're savvy people, savvy young people. They really, on the buy side, did not need full representation, right? It was one of those situations where as the buyer agent, they're sending me stuff before I even see it, because they're on the alerts, they're on the ball, and by all means I'm sure if you ask them, they were satisfied with my services, but we ended up going through a deal, and don't get me wrong, few things popped up, right? Where stepped in, maybe inspection related stuff, whatever, but they did not need full representation, talking about years in advance to when they actually made this maneuver on the buy side, right? You can put yourself in the shoes of someone who, in the end, the deal that they ended up buying, I think we got like a check for, probably in excess of $16,000, $17,000. And I can definitely put myself in the shoes of that person who looks at the fee structure and says, like, this is pretty wild. This is just one of two transactions as we're buying and selling at the same time. Like, my value proposition to these people, it wasn't what I wanted it to be. They were very knowledgeable about homes and home buying. Search was available to them. They, they understood contingencies. They understood, there was nothing as far as delivering value, right? You look at this, we were paid 2.5% fee as a buyer agent there. The idea that we delivered in excess of 2.5% of value to the transaction, and I'm talking about, I say we, I mean the royal we. The idea that I delivered in excess of 2.5% of the transaction value in that case is just a fucking lie. It's just not how it's just not true. I wish I could say, but I'm just being honest with you, and this is coming from someone with me. Like, I have the utmost confidence about my buyer representation ability, right? Truth be told, on the sell side, I believe we provide more value. right? On the sell side, we have a marketing package. We have an understanding of value and how to maximize it. We know all the steps. We know how to anticipate problems that will save or make you money. There just tends to be a fair amount of grunt work on the sell side as well that we end up doing just to get you to close. There's a lot of advice even leading up to the process of putting it on the market. The truth is, the average person owns and sells every 7 to 12 years. So they don't know how to do it right, especially on the sell side. Buyer agency, the way we've performed it, and in today's era, has been flawed, right? So even with those big gaps, that there's just less knowledge required on that. Again, the search is available. We got to stop kidding ourselves, right? The listings are available to everybody all the time. Like the comps are available, they're all out there. So now I can't lie. There's also this element, because I know there is so much anti-real estate sentiment out there. There's also a part of me that welcomes this too. Like, there are not everyone is the people, I say this all the time, 90% of drivers believe they're above average drivers, right? Dunning-Kruger. It's just a fact. Like, not everyone thinks they're my friends who were capable of doing this on their own. Not everybody is, right? And so, there's a part of me that welcomes people to give it a shot, right? So what do future real estate transactions look like? That's a note I have here. I don't know exactly, but for certain there will be more transparency and more options when it comes to agents and their fees. On the seller side, cooperating compensation, where you pay the buyer agent, will no longer be a requirement. So I do think ahead to those meetings. I think a lot of what the bigger companies do on that is probably going to dictate how the market responds. But I think if you're asking me, and when I'm sitting down with the seller in early July, and we're actually talking about cooperating compensation, I think what I'm going to tell them is, look, we don't necessarily have to include it or advertise it, but that you should anticipate cooperating compensation being part of the buyer offers coming back at you. And there's even a chance that the numbers coming back at you, written in the offers explicitly, is just going to be the same as what we deal with today, right? So it's just that it's going to be more, transparent, optional. We're going to talk through it more at the offer phase on both sides. I think that is where this is going to land. We talk about the commercial world. This is actually how it works, right? So a listing is put out there. There is no explicit cooperating compensation mentioned. There is no MLS, official state MLS in the commercial world. So there is no offer of cooperating compensation. And then inevitably, the buyers, brokers come through, the people on the buyer side, and it is written right into their offer to purchase what their commission is going to look like. On the buyer side, as far as buyer agents, they have to start doing what we do when we have a new buyer client. I actually have a sit-down buyer consultation with people now. It's going back 2 years. This is what we do. The reason I started doing it was because I knew these rules were coming. And it was just, I always wanted to have the opportunity to say, hey, look, if these rules change, this is what we're going to do. So I think what a lot of people are saying is that buyer agents are going to have to get compensated directly by the buyer themselves. I don't know that that's true. I think what you're going to see is, I think on the buyer side, we're going to have to sit with these new buyers and explain, look, if you're going to work with me, this is what I do as far as my compensation. Plan A is to get it from the seller, but plan B is that you're going to have to pay, up to this, or maybe a flat fee here, right? So part of plan A is you're saying, hey, I'm going to be writing this into every one of your offers, right? So if you think that is going to be a hindrance to your offer, and you think you can go it alone, you should do that, So this is the value proposition stuff that we have to talk about. And there's going to be, a lot of people say race to the bottom. I do think there's going to be a little bit of that on fees on either side. We'll see. I don't know what to expect on that. I'm excited about it. But I think, when those conversations start happening, I think it's good to just be sitting down with these people and explaining, like, this is actually how this is going to work in your first buyer conversation. Zillow, guys, like, I don't know if everybody fully understands how Zillow works. Like, I've never, Zillow is the number one buyer lead source for real estate agents. And what they do is they have this Zillow Premier Agent service, and you'll pay a lot per month to be one of a select few agents in a certain zip code. And what happens is, so when you're browsing Zillow as a consumer, right, and you say, okay, Zillow gives you the option, set up a showing here at X time, call this number. You give them a call or you submit a request or whatever for a showing. What Zillow is doing is they're taking your information and they're calling one of those agents who pays them in this given area. And they're saying, hey, we got a lead for you. We're going to link you up right now. And then that agent they're not the listing agent. They are not the representative of the property. They've probably never been there, right? And they're quickly BSing their way through a conversation. Their goal is to set an appointment in person with you at the property, right? And that way they have, they're the procuring cause. If you do buy the property, they are entitled to a fee, right? So it's just this like lead aggregation bullshit. It really is. And my belief is Zillow is really preying on your ignorance as a consumer. And, they're linking you up with someone who pays them, who they really don't give a shit how qualified they are. They're just taking the money and this is the system today, guys. This is the system. Yeah, this may be as simple as fees generally remaining the same. Again, transparency is a good thing. That's the phrase of the day. As far as positives, to me, there are a lot of positives to go with this. First, I got to get over the hit to my bottom line. I just have to assume we're making less on the buyer side, whether that's a per transaction basis or just fewer buyer side transactions overall. It is what it is. I don't know if you can tell. I'm beginning to make my peace with it. I think there's a part of me that because I'm eager to see the change in the world, I made my peace with it a long time ago. I'm nervous, but we'll see what happens. If selling costs come down, people will be able to move more freely. I think that's what I really have the most hope for. Is this is not going to, inventory is the problem, right? Prices and inventory are the problem. Supply and demand are the problem. So if selling costs come down, the ability for people to move more freely, it might even encourage moving and buying and selling more frequently. That's more transactions. My hopes are high for that. And then, the change will also, another positive, the change will serve the better agents, right? Bad ones will drop out. Non-performing ones will drop out. You shouldn't always go with the first one you meet. That's the way it always should have been. And I think if we can get rid of some of these lead aggregator type systems, slap happy, just meet me at the property and you're married to me, you shouldn't always go with the first one you meet. And I do think it will force people to really consider when they're making the buyer agency commitment. The other positive that I think about all the time, the professional reputation of real estate agents will improve over time. There's a lot of talk about how there are low barriers to entry in our industry. Everybody and their cousin and their aunt and everybody has, a real estate license. That's true. So, hopefully if they create some barriers to entry there, that will also go to the professional reputation of real estate agents improving again over time. With the positive, there are also some myths, right? So home prices, like anyone who thinks home prices are coming down because of this is on crack, right? There will be an interesting transitional period, second half of this year, but as always, don't hold your breath on prices. I think I saw some report that said like prices are expected or could drop up to 10% as a result of this change. That doesn't even make sense. Like, around here, our average fee, if you ran the average, it would come in at like 4.67%, right? As far as total real estate commission paid on a transaction. So where's that other I'm going to have to do math. 5.33%. Yeah, it wasn't really math. Where's that coming from? Seriously, and listing agents aren't going away. There's going to be reasons to use buyer brokers in at least a few cases, if not many. So I don't know where they think that's coming from, unless they're banking on this really loosening up inventory, which I just do not understand. I'm hopeful that it will encourage a little bit more movement, but you talk about a 10% drop, that is precipitous. There's one headline I see all the time: the 6% real estate commission is gone. That's been going on for the last week. I think the New York Times ran an article with that heading. I've literally never done a deal where there was a 6% rate of commission. Where are people doing these deals? And I don't believe this establishes a new standard either, this settlement. People can charge what they want still, right? So I don't think as an agent, if you start charging a 7% real estate commission, you're going to get a ton of business. But that was never, right? Like 6%, again, I've never done a deal where there was a 6% rate of commission. So in the end, transparency is a good thing. I don't know if you can tell, like my thoughts, these are just my rapid fire thoughts here. I think transparency and choices are good for the consumer, plain and simple. Real estate agents aren't going away. The truth is homes, properties, these are not liquid assets. These are not click of a mouse purchases. Property sales require deal people. There's always going to be a place in the world for a deal guy. That's me. I'm a deal guy, whether you like it or not. Even if they say outright, we're no longer allowing commissions on the buy side ever, I'll still be here offering my buy side advice. I don't ask much here on this channel, but I'll tell you right now, if you're watching, my business now more than ever is about listings, is about selling properties. If you or anyone you know is selling, maybe they're in the earliest possible stages, don't let them go with a part-timer, a real estate hobbyist. Get in touch. Power Realty Advisors. I'm excited. I got a new setup here, right? We're doing a little podcast type setup. Got a lot of new interesting videos to come. Thank you for watching.